Welcome to House Call. I'm Dr. Gerald Lala.
And I'm Dr. Richard Jensen.
Wonderful to have you with us again today. It's a great day. We're going to talk about fat healthy, not fat sick. We're going to talk about how you can maybe lose weight if you want to, how you can eat the right kind of fats and stay away from the bad fats, and it'll be just a wonderful, wonderful program. And we're going to talk, you wouldn't want to talk about fats without talking about carbohydrates and proteins. And so Dr. Jensen is going to begin to address this now. Fat, carbohydrates, and proteins, they all work together.
Well, thank you, Dr. Lala. Fats, carbohydrates, and proteins are known as macronutrients. And these macronutrients are also used by the body for energy. And they support cell growth, they protect organs, they produce hormones, they aid in the absorption of vitamins A, D, E, and K, as well as beta carotene. And so they're very important aspects, particularly with fats when we're looking at the absorption of those fat-soluble vitamins. So fats, there's natural and there's man-made fats. And what we're looking primarily at are those fats that have changed their chemical structure through a heat process that's called trans fatty acids. Trans fatty acids are, when you look at a chemical distinction, there's usually cis and trans. And cis is like if I have these two hands together, like these fingers are the chemical bonds of the fats. And what you have are the two thumbs are in a cis configuration. This would also be a cis configuration. And with heat, you'll break this electronic bond and allow this thing to spin. And when it spins and then relinks, all of a sudden you have a trans configuration. So this would be what they're talking about with trans fatty acids and how they're created with a very high heat process. And usually that high heat process has to take place in like an industrial type kitchen or facility, not at your home facility. You just cannot generate the heat necessary for that. So they would then be referred to as a man-made type fat. Then there's also fats that are hydrogenated, and hydrolyzed fat, hydrolyzed oil, which is another name for fat. We also know that as plastic. But hydrogenated fat is also saturated fats. And what happens is they have all these bonds. All these bonds are another place where you can link another molecule on. So if you split this bond, then you can put two hydrogen at the end of this, and that's hydrogenated. Where you have a double bond there, that's where you have less hydrogenated, and that's where you have an unsaturated fat. Saturated fat, unsaturated fat. And so what we look for, primarily our essential fatty acids are polyunsaturated fats. And the difference between those are if you have a totally saturated fat. An example of that is butter. It's solid at room temperature, okay? Or semi-solid at room temperature. Then you can have those that are unsaturated fats or monounsaturated fats. It means it only has one double bond like that. An example of that is, say, olive oil. Olive oil, when you put it in the refrigerator, at room temperature, it's an oil, but you put it in the refrigerator, and as it cools down, it becomes more solid, kind of cloudy in there. You have the polyunsaturated fats, and those, you can take that and you can put it in the freezer, and the freezer will stay liquid even in the freezer with that polyunsaturated. And that's one of the ideal ways why our omega-3 fatty acids are very good for us from its polyunsaturated standpoint. Now, when we're looking at whether it's solid or semi-solid at room temperature with the trans fatty acids or the saturated fats, they tend to raise your total cholesterol and your low low-density lipoproteins, or your LDL cholesterol, which is the bad cholesterol, if you put it in those terms. It usually increases your risk of cardiovascular disease. Sometimes they usually look at foods that have trans fatty acids. They usually say these are the ones that have a crust on the outside or are crispy. That's not necessarily so anymore since they've changed a lot of the processing, so now you're getting crackers that say trans fatty acid free. But you want to look at, at things like what the American Heart Association has said, that 1% of the caloric intake per day of trans fatty acids. In fact, what their new determination is no one should consume any trans fatty acids. It's just because it's deleterious to one's health.
Interesting. When they decrease the trans fatty acids, very often what you see then is the refined carbohydrate, the grams of refined carbohydrates going up. Mm-hmm. So the sucrose level is going up, which is really hard on the pancreas for insulin production. So it's just kind of a joke in a way. You know, they're saying, well, we're going to cut down our fat, but now we're going to increase the sugar content, see? So,
Right.
So are there different groups of fats?
Well, first of all, since it has that increase of cardiovascular risk that we're looking at, and it's the increase of LDL, LDL is the fat that's actually, it's just been absorbed. It's on its way into the body, where the body is looking to grab it as part of one of those nutrients, okay? As part of one of those macronutrients for itself. And in doing so, what we have here is a slide at what happens with LDL. If you bring up that slide, please. As you can see, that first one that's up in the upper left-hand corner, I'll bring the arrow out to it. Here we go. This is a normal artery. It's a normal artery, and there we have what we call is the lumen, and the lumen is the opening to the artery where all the blood flow is. And then you have a ring of muscle here, and then you have the outside, the arterial wall, okay? Now, what happens there is when you have low density lipoprotein, it's traveling through this blood, and it can be actually captured here in the interluminal space and start occluding this opening or lumen. And when that occludes to the point, as to this one, where it's cut down blood flow quite a bit, there's a warning factor of disease called angina, or chest pains is what it is. It's called angina, and that usually occurs once that vessel is 75% blocked off, as is shown in that picture there. And then we have the heart here that we'll bring up, and the heart, basically, what we get is blood returns to the heart through the vena cava. There's a superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava, and it goes into this atrium here. And into the atrium it flows into this ventricle, and the ventricle then pushes this all out where it goes to the lungs through the pulmonary artery, okay? And then it returns back into this atrium here and goes into this ventricle, and that ventricle then pushes it out as we track this through the aorta, where you see the arch of the aorta up here, where we have these arteries that go up to the head and out to the arms, and then this becomes a large artery. See how it comes down out below the heart here, and that travels down through the thoracic and abdominal area, where it splits and gives all your blood supply to your kidneys and your legs and your internal organs as well. And so what we're looking at is a lot of times through the arch here is where there's increased pressure, because you've got all this blood coming out at a very high pressure that hits this arch, and a lot of times we start to have plaquing right in this arch here that's trying to take care of that, take care of all that pressure.
And as doctors of chiropractic who do make x-rays of our new patients, very often people who have a humping in their spine, a curve forward in their spine like this, they have high blood pressure. And after an adjustment, very frequently, that blood pressure decreases simply because when it's humped forward like this, it's putting pressure on that aortic knob or arch. Thus, the heart has to push harder to get the blood out into the aorta or through the aorta and down into the thoracic aorta. And so it becomes very important then that if you have a concern about high blood pressure, that you would go out on our website and look up blood pressure problems, and there's quite a lengthy discussion of that, very helpful for you. If you want to try a natural solution to high blood pressure, then you might want to go to a chiropractor who does a thorough examination on you and takes x-rays of you and makes sure that they send those x-rays to a radiologist, particularly a chiropractic radiologist, who will be able to say if any problem in your back, your lower neck, or your upper back might be really related to your high blood pressure, right?
Right.
Okay,
right.
good.
So let's go on back to some of the natural fats.
Fats.
The natural fats here, we're looking at two groups. There's plant and animal fats. Usually the animal fats contain a higher content of saturated fats, but they'll be both contained in both. There's plant and animal. In fact, in the old days where we had a lot of free range kind of where the animals were just free to roam and their diet consisted more of the fats that were unsaturated, we found that they had more unsaturated fats at that time than they do now. Saturated, found primarily in the animal and dairy products, such as butter, and can also be found in plant oils such as coconut oil, are semi-solid at room temperature. So that's where some of the natural fats are. Then we've gone on to the monounsaturated fats, and remember I was telling you about those. Monounsaturated fats, that one is it's like olive oil. It helps reduce LDL cholesterol. They lower the risk of cardiovascular disease and stroke and provide nutrients to help develop and maintain the body's cells. Typically, they're high in vitamin E as well. Again, it's found in olive oil, in canola oil, and peanut oil. And one of the things that we could look at also is that when you're looking at inflammatory and anti-inflammatory type fats, these monounsaturated fats tend to be neutral in that way, so they don't change you towards pro-inflammatory and anti-inflammatory. So olive oil generally and canola oil are very good oils in that regard for people who have arthritic problems, as well as fibromyalgia, those kinds of things, as long as they're not sensitive to those oils, such as in a food allergy. Then we have unsaturated fats, Dr. Lala.
Unsaturated fats, well, Dr. Jensen has already mentioned that, the polyunsaturated fats. They help reduce LDL, low-density lipoproteins, that form of cholesterol. They lower the risk of cardiovascular disease, therefore they lower the risk of heart attack and stroke. They provide nutrients that are essential, the fat, what we call the fats, omega-6 and the omega-3 fatty acids, which the human body cannot itself synthesize on its own. It can't. We have to take those in our diet if we're to have them. And of course, their potential health benefits. Again, as Dr. Jensen mentioned very briefly, the polyunsaturated fats are found in corn oil, safflower oil, sesame oil, blackcurrant oil, borage oil, sunflower oil, evening primrose oil, and fatty fish oils. Now let's talk a little bit about the types of unsaturated fatty acids. They're called MUFAs, or monounsaturated fatty acids. The second type are, as we were talking here just a moment ago, polyunsaturated fatty acids, which produce EFAs, or the essential fatty acids. They are healthy fatty acids and remain liquid at room temperature. They assist in lowering the risk of cardiovascular disease. Now, with that in mind, Dr. Jensen is going to talk about the essential fatty acids that I mentioned here very briefly.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Lala. The essential fatty acids, when we're looking at omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids, the omega-6 fatty acids are primarily found in the vegetable sources, okay? And the omega-3 fatty acids are generally found within the fish, primarily cold water fish, And the reason for that is not that they create their own omega-3s, it's the plant life that's within the ocean in the cold levels are the ones that create those omega-3s and then built up within the fish's body as they consume those. So what we're looking at are that both of them are vital to regulating inflammation. Primarily, omega-3s are more towards regulating against inflammation. Omega-6s tend to go towards inflammation. Inflammation is an important process. You've got to have it, but you don't want too much of it. So again, it's a balance. There's immunity and healing of wounds and injuries, essential for the brain and nervous systems and the eye health. One of the things that we find are people who have metabolic syndromes, such as they're having trouble with sugars, with regulating their blood glucose levels. Omega-3s work fairly well for that, and it's due to the cell membrane that's built up with fats, and it makes them more fluid, makes them more responsive to insulin, and therefore can help with blood sugar problems as well, because it's making the communication in the body that much more responsive. So let's go on to some more on omega-3 fatty acids. The alpha-linolenic acid, or ALA, is a type of omega-3 family. It's part of the omega-3 family. The body converts it to EPA and DHA. So that's very important to have the alpha-linolenic acid within your body. It's found in flax seeds, flaxseed oil, hemp oil, nuts, green leafy vegetables, and wheat germ. And one of the things that we want to look at is that many times in the elderly, they start to reduce the enzymes to create the EPA, DHA from the flaxseed, and so sometimes it's more important for them to get those directly from that. The other thing is from the flax seeds, you want them to be fresh, because these oils will go rancid quite quickly. They'll oxidize quite quickly. So it's make sure they're in a dark bottle away from the sunlight, which will oxidize them through the ultraviolet rays, and also keep them cold to help keep them fresh longer. Also, EPA, which is eicosapentaenoic acid, and DHA, docosahexaenoic acid, are very important in our bodies. They're, again, derivatives of ALA, and they're found in fatty fish like salmon, tuna, and mackerel are good sources of these essential fatty acids. Gamma-linolenic acid is another essential fatty acid. It's a derivative of linoleic acid that's not very high in our diets. It's found in borage oil and blackcurrant seed oil, as well as evening primrose oil. So the gamma-linolenic acid is also important. Examples of unsaturated fatty acids, Dr.
Well,
Lala?
there are many good examples. Canola oil, safflower oil, of course, sesame oil, olive and fish oils, and they're, of course, found in butter, palm, and corn oil. Now, they're trans fatty acids. Let's talk about the trans fatty acids. Where are they found? They're typically found in margarine, shortening, and fried foods. Now, the saturated fats, the types of saturated fats, they consist of what we call short-chain saturated fatty acids. They're readily metabolized by the body for energy, so they're quickly metabolized by the body for energy. Now, the saturated fatty acids, there's another variety referred to as the medium-chain fatty acids. They're also metabolized for energy. The body metabolizes them, burns them for energy. They are not associated, I will say that again, they are not associated with elevated cholesterol. They are found in coconut oil, palm oil, and kernel oil. So they're fine. Now, long-chain saturated fatty acids. Let's discuss those. They're associated with elevated LDL, that's low-density lipoproteins, or that's the bad cholesterol. And of course, they are linked then to cardiovascular disease, as Dr. Jensen was talking about earlier, and that they attach themselves to the inside lining of our arteries, and then they begin to develop plaque there. The plaque begins to harden, and when it becomes hardened, it's referred to as atherosclerosis, which simply means that insufficient amount of blood flows through those arteries. When it's up in the coronary arteries, then the person, if it's to such a degree, the person begins having chest pain and or a heart attack. All right, so they are found. Now, the saturated, long-chain saturated fatty acids are typically found in meats, especially red meats. I'll say that again. They're found in meats, especially red meats. Now, if a person eats meat or beef that is very lean, that is very low in fat, then they're not going to be taking into their system the long-chain saturated fatty acids. Now, fats also can contain a lot of toxins, and Dr. Jensen is going to spend some time talking to you about fats and toxins.
Thank you, Dr. Lala. When we look at fats and toxins, we're looking primarily at how a lot of these toxins, in order to get them out of the metabolism of the body, we try to store them away. But many times what happens is they're fat-soluble type compounds, and therefore they get stored, and therefore they increase in the body within the fats. So toxins, pesticides, hormones, antibiotics, fertilizers, toxic metals accumulate within that fat. And therefore, when we consume fats that are saturated, as well as unsaturated, the fat-soluble vitamins and fish oils, they can contain toxins which predispose the body to sickness and disease. And so many times we have these toxins in us, and we seem to have gotten over our reaction to them, and then something happens where we lose some weight, and that fat is being used as a fuel, and starts releasing these things. Those toxins then can again start to react within our body, and we need to have those types of nutrients that help us to detoxify, to help us through that process. Now, it's always a buyer beware, isn't it?
It's always
Doctor?
a buyer beware in this society. It is.
And so
That impure.
what's important is to read the label. Read the label and see what types of fats are in there, as well as when you purchase the fat-soluble vitamins, that they should be of pharmaceutical quality. Why is that important? It's important that the fat-soluble vitamins don't have these toxins in there, because they will be stored in the fat also. And many times they may contain that unless a pharmaceutical quality has been reached in which they've gotten rid of that. And usually that's it goes through a purifying process. And after those purifying processes take place, then they usually have to go through independent assays of these vitamins, that then they check whether there is whether the vitamin that's in there is in there in the quantities that they say are in there, in the forms that they say that are in there, or and that the other types of problem chemicals are not in there. Imagine this: if you're getting it in a fat form, that fat form may contain some of these xenoestrogens that are found within nature now. Xenoestrogens are usually man-made compounds, synthetic compounds, that react as though they are estrogens within the body, and react with estrogen-sensitive tissues that are both found within the male and the female. And therefore, when you have hormone-reacting type type chemicals within the body, you start to have those body changes that take place from those reactive estrogens. In fact, what they're finding is there's a huge increase in breast cancer in men, that the men's breast tissue is developing now through a lot of these xenoestrogens that are taking place. And so it's a buyer beware kind of thing to make sure that you're not putting something in your body that you think is good and that is also having a deleterious effect to you.
Well, we've been talking about fat healthy, and if you turned in a little bit late, we laid down some foundation principles that fats are micronutrients that our body uses for energy. Certainly it uses proteins and carbohydrates as well. But fat is, by God's design, meant to support cell growth, protect our organs, produce hormones. Our hormones are manufactured, are synthesized from fat. So if we have our fat levels are too low, we're going to have difficulty producing hormones. They also aid in the absorption. If we have a deficiency of good fats in our body, we're going to have a deficiency and a lack of proper absorption of vitamins A, vitamin D, vitamin E, vitamin K, and beta carotene. We looked at natural and man-made fats. We talked about trans fatty acids, which are the bad ones, which are made primarily by man through hydrogenation. They're solid or semi-solid at room temperature. It's really easy to determine if they're a trans fatty acid or not. They do, when consumed, raise or increase the total cholesterol, LDL, the low-density lipoprotein, the bad fats. When that's the case, that these low-density lipoproteins are high in our blood for extended periods of time, they definitely predispose us to cardiovascular diseases and incidences, of course. It is estimated by the American Heart Association that our fat intake of the trans fatty acids should be no more than 1% of our caloric intake a day. A person would be very, very difficult to not have to be totally free of trans fatty acids in this society. It's a good goal, but really difficult, and it's not going to kill you or cause cardiovascular disease if you have some trans fatty acids in your diet. Not encouraging that, but it's not going to kill you. So the natural fats come out of two different groups, plant and animal. They're saturated and unsaturated because when they come out of beef, for example, as Dr. Jensen just mentioned here, they're going to be saturated fats. So saturated fat is found in animal and dairy products. Animal and dairy products. We're not vegetarians, so we don't disagree with vegetarians. We just don't happen to be, but we do have a minimal intake in our lives of these animal and dairy products. And of course, what would they be? They would be products such as butter or coconut oil that are semi-solid at room temperature. We talked about monounsaturated fatty acids. We talked about essential fatty acids. We talked about the different types, the monounsaturated fatty acids, the polyunsaturated fatty acids. We said that they were healthy fatty acids, and we know them to be that nature if they remain liquid at room temperature. Again, they assist in reducing cardiovascular disease. It all starts out with them accumulating inside of our arteries, narrowing the inside of our arteries, which restricts the blood supply. So we also talked about the omega-6 and the omega-3 fatty acids. If you're interested in more information, you go right out to our website, and there's a plethora of information out there for you. Thank you for being with us.